Growing up in Grand Rapids, my family and most of the community I interacted with were of Dutch heritage. I grew up with an elementary school friend in first grade named Dirk and a high school classmate named Leisha. Those sorts of names were common to me with all the Dutch people who surrounded me. You see, I was surrounded by a community of people, really, who loved Jesus and who largely lived their lives with people with similar backgrounds and similar values. And as a kid, I loved it. The relative sameness and similarity of the people around me was all I knew, and it was comforting, and it was familiar. Upon arriving at Michigan State University for graduate school, I started getting lab experience through a temporary period where I was assigned to a laboratory where I was the only native English speaker, the only one. And I quickly realized that I had no clue what one of my lab mates was saying because his English was so heavily accented. I didn't have any experience with people who spoke English as a second language. And I really wanted to communicate, and I wanted to understand him. In fact, I needed to do it, to learn and to do what needed to be done in the lab. But that desire, it wasn't enough. I lacked experience. And what I realized through my time at MSU is that it's hard to love other people well if you've never had the experience of actually loving different types of people. MSU opened me to a whole world of different ethnicities and languages and faiths that, I had heard about, but I'd never fully experienced before. And it was both really difficult and really helpful for me to be the only native English speaker in that laboratory. And after growing up with sameness, I was the other, the person who was different. Wow, and it was difficult for me to connect at first, but I worked at it. And my life, I think, is better for it. And I hope that through those efforts, other people's lives are better for it too, because I'm better able to give and to receive from people who are different than me. Today, we are continuing in our series, The Deeply Formed Life. We're finding throughout this series that in order for God to transform every part of our being, we can't settle for a shallow, skim the surface sort of spirituality. So together, we're growing our roots deeply into Jesus and God's way of life. Now, in order to get there, we have to be willing to challenge long-held beliefs and behaviors, even the ones that still may be locked in our heads, to ensure that we are truly following the way of Jesus. Now, the sad truth is that too many Christians are living lives that are indistinguishable from those who aren't following Jesus. Too many of us who claim to follow the ways of Jesus live with unconscious biases and, sometimes even deeply ingrained racist beliefs. Too many of us continue to benefit from systems that oppress our BIPOC brothers and sisters and look the other way. And I've heard from BIPOC friends that the reluctance to take a stand in solidarity is often more painful than overt racism. Now, these realities remind us that it's possible to be committed to the external activities of Christianity without being deeply transformed by Christ. As pastor and author Rich Villodas, whose book helped inform this series, says, instead of being deeply formed, we settle for being shallowly shaped. Here's the truth. God is not interested in transforming some parts of you and leaving the rest of you untouched. God's desire is to transform every single part of you until, as the Apostle Paul puts it, Christ is formed in you. This kind of transformation that we're after, it's not easy. Jesus' way was offensive to the world around him and challenging to his disciples. And even so, as we will see today, Jesus' followers leaned into a new way of living. And that's what we hope that you will also do today. Now, last week, we talked about contemplative rhythms. We talked about slowing down our pace of life and rooting ourselves in God's love. This week, today, we're talking about racial reconciliation. In a world marked by fragmentation and by racial division, we're going to hear today a vision of what it looks like when the gospel, the good news of Jesus, gets a hold of a people. When the gospel gets a hold of an individual. When the gospel gets a hold of a community, bearing witness to the life-changing message of Jesus Christ. Let's pause a moment for a question about the gospel. It can be hard to pin down, so I want to give you a chance to first define the gospel. Here's our question. When you hear gospel, what comes to mind? How would you briefly define it and what it means? Let's take a moment and discuss that.